I'm Claudine Wong, joining you from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm joined by Maya Levine, who is a security engineer for Checkpoint Software. Maya, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So a lot to talk about. We're doing this interview on Zoom. We are not alone in how many people have taken to Zoom and are using it a lot. But, Zoom's gotten a lot of press recently because people are starting to worry. Is it safe to use Zoom? What should be concerned about? Is Zoom a platform we should all be using? And what's your answer to that?
So the uptick in attacks that we've seen in Zoom makes sense because of the uptick of the users that are using it. Hackers are always going to be targeting what is most likely to be successful for them, what the most amount of people are using. But I don't think Zoom in itself is inherently flawed. The metaphor I like to use is if you have a lock on your front door, but you're not using it, you shouldn't be surprised if somebody walks into your home. And so Zoom has security features that you can think of as this lock to try to mitigate the risk of somebody that you don't know joining your meeting.
So as someone who deals with security all the time, I'm going to pull this up randomly because this just kind of shows how many headlines we're seeing where, you have people saying, don't use Zoom and Google Hangouts, passwords and email addresses for thousands of Zoom accounts are for sale on the dark web. These are 500,000 hacked Zoom accounts given away for free. These are the headlines that we're seeing. And so the question is, as we try to stay on top of it, the everyday average person or the business, are we going to be able to do that? And where's the next target? When they're selling the information and what you have to do to create an account on Zoom, how vulnerable are we, in this space?
Yeah, so when it comes to leaked passwords and usernames, that's not Zoom specific. That is sold on the dark web for everything from your Gmail to your bank account information, all of that. And because of that, we really recommend you to frequently change your passwords. I know it's not something that anyone wants to do, but it really helps to maintain security for all your different accounts. When it comes to Zoom,
those headlines, though, we shouldn't be like, oh my gosh, this is something new. It's just that it's something new for Zoom, but it shouldn't be something that all of us aren't saying, yeah, we've got to watch out for that just in general.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not completely surprised by breaches anymore. They've been happening all the time for years. And like, for example, the Equifax breach, all that information that was stolen was then sold on the dark web. And so it's very important to update your passwords because if you are using that same password that was stolen, then somebody can access your account now. If you're changing it frequently, even if they bought that information, it's no longer relevant.
Right. So there's two parts of it, I guess. What are they taking and how can we fix it? And if it's a fairly easy fix, then great. I think it is, people have gone to passphrases and different things like that because it is really hard to think of and remember as many passwords as we are required to remember to really keep ourselves safe.
Yeah, there's a lot of different solutions out there, password managers and, two-factor authentication. So you can't just log in with your password. You need to confirm from your email or confirm from your phone and all of that is good. Having extra password security is good, but for the individual user, change your password frequently. And if you're using Zoom, don't post your meeting ID or your meeting information on any kind of public forum if you can avoid it. If you post it on a Facebook group, on Twitter, on something like that, all the attacker needs to do is just look up zoom.us and your meeting ID will pop up.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't post them there, but that makes sense, right? You just forget how easily that you are targeted in this. What about, in the bigger forms? Let's talk about schools because this is the headline that came out, recently because, Oakland schools really, they're not alone in teachers doing classrooms on Zoom as we're doing online learning. So, and I have a friend who's a teacher who in a middle school class, she got Zoom bombed and it was really distressing for not only her children, but also for her because you're trying to protect these kids in this space. Have they closed the doors to that? How do you protect yourself from Zoom bombing?
Yeah, so there's a few features that you can take advantage of. The first, and I think that this is the coolest feature, is you can only allow signed in users to join. What that means is that if somebody tries to join your event and they're trying to join not through the exact email that you sent them the Zoom invite to, they won't be allowed in. it'll say only authorized users can join. And this is really great for schools because teachers know who are in their classrooms, right? They can send an email specifically to all their students. And then even if a hacker is somehow able to get the meeting ID and the password, they still won't be able to join. So that's definitely something that educators should be taking advantage of.
Do you think so? That is it just requires a little more work in advance, right? Like, I mean, I think the reason for those people who haven't set up a Zoom call, a lot of people I think are just, someone give me the link, because there's always like one person in the group who can figure out Zoom. And then the other
Yeah.
people sometimes are like, if they don't use it for work or they don't use it for something else, they're like, just tell me where to click. And so it's been fairly easy to just copy the link to the meeting ID and hook it in, as opposed to typing in someone's email address or someone's login name. But I think if you're saying, if you do a little bit of extra work in advance.
Yeah, exactly. Not only, so if you don't post it anywhere public, send it out to private emails. That's a more secure way of doing it. There's also settings that before you start the meeting, you can go in and you can set up. Another feature that would be useful is something called the waiting room. And what that means is that before somebody is allowed into the meeting, the host has to manually approve them. And so if a teacher, for example, is manually approving each student and they have their video on, they can see them. They can say, I recognize you, you're allowed in. You don't have your video on, even if they have the same name as the student. If they join and, they can kind of see who they are and manually accept them, it adds that extra little level of security. And all you have to do to enable this is just kind of click a checkbox before the meeting starts.
And do you just have to give yourself a little more time to make the Zoom meeting effective, do you think, to make sure that, I mean, as everyone kind of gets used to this, they're trying to go the easiest way. But if you just kind of set up more time, tell people to check in a little earlier, 5 minutes before you're supposed to start, so you have a time to check everyone in, then
yes,
easier.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, enabling all these features within Zoom, maybe the first time will take you a little bit to find where they are, but afterwards it should be really easy. Should be pretty simple to, okay, I go here to settings or I go here to manage participants and I just enable those features.
And it's nice as well, I would think, for people to, I mean, I've seen them use passwords on their interviews quite frequently now, which they didn't do before. Like, they like the one click, but maybe now a couple clicks is better.
Yeah, passwords are great. That's another level of security. It's not foolproof. If, for example, one of the students forwards the invite to whoever they want to, the invite includes the password in it. So it's not a foolproof method. I would really recommend trying to take advantage of other features besides the password.
It's not just the password that will protect us. In terms of who's most at risk, I mean, we've talked about the schools, you have businesses that are using them, you have personal use. Who's most, in terms of hackers and who they're targeting, who are they really setting their sights on? I mean, Zoom bombing can be just disruptive because they want to, just be what they think is funny or what they think is just to prove a point. And then there's the other, I'm going to take information, or I'm going to, also, there's a bunch of different levels in this. Who do you think is most at risk?
So I think there's kind of two answers to this. The easiest forums to Zoom bomb, the easiest meetings to Zoom bomb would be the companies that are trying to host public events, right? Because they have to post it publicly on social media. They have to promote it. They can't be like, oh, I recognize you, I'm allowing you in. And for them, I would recommend to, purchase kind of a more paying account and take advantage of a feature called webinars. And what that does is that it gives you, okay, these are the people that are the panelists and they're allowed to speak, turn on their video, share their screen. Everybody else that joins is just an attendee. And they can, post something in the Q&A or post something in the chat or respond to polling questions, but they can't take over your screen.
And that's something that Zoom doesn't have, but other software companies have?
No, Zoom has that feature.
You just have to pay for it.
Yeah, Zoom has that feature. I don't know exactly how they're dealing with. I know they're giving some things to schools for free, but this is for like big kind of public companies that are hosting these public events and they don't want somebody to take advantage of it.
But certainly other people have had hosting sites. I mean, we've seen a lot of, online, let's say college tours, for example. They're not using Zoom. They have other servers and other host groups. And why do you think Zoom has really just taken off as opposed to their competitors? Because certainly, when Zoom has become the buzzword now, do you think there's something specific about it and that these other companies will kind of move their way up and there'll be a lot of different options in how you want to host? Or has it just become, like the iPhone where everyone's just so used to it, they just kind of crowdsource to that?
Yeah, I'm just gonna speculate here. I
Yeah.
think Zoom was like the industry leader at the time when this whole pandemic broke out, and they just kind of,
Took
in
over.
some ways, benefited
Yeah.
because they got a huge boom of people, but in some ways, really didn't because they were the head target for
Yeah.
hackers. And
Do you think they're doing enough? I mean, when you look at the security things they have in place and the security measures and how they've responded to these recent concerns about bombing and hacks, do you think as a company they're doing enough and that we should feel pretty secure? And as an industry, there's enough being done?
I think, I've been a little impressed at how they have reacted. I don't think it's about never having vulnerabilities because everybody at some point is going to have a flaw in their software. I think it's how you react to it. And so back in January, before this whole pandemic really kind of took place in the US, Check Point actually discovered a software vulnerability in Zoom, and we reported it to them, and they had a really quick turnaround in fixing it. And that leads me to kind of my last point that is applicable for everybody. Keep your software up to date. This is not just for Zoom, this is for everything. When you are keeping your software up to date, in each update, there's fixes to security vulnerabilities. And you're giving yourself kind of the latest protection that these companies are providing. So that's a really important tip for everything, not just for Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, would you say, we've talked about the big picture for companies using it, for using webinars, for schools, but really if on an everyday Zoom call, I didn't do some of the things in our conversation right now that you just mentioned to just ensure, how this call would go. Would you have everyone, as you to go back to your analogy, just make sure you lock the door, whether you have a huge crowd coming over, which no one should have, but, or you have one person, coming over, or you're going to be home or you're going to be in the yard. Like you should just be in the habit of locking the door regardless.
Yeah, I mean, I think for some people, they would think it's a little inconvenient, similar to changing your password frequently. It's inconvenient to go in and change it, but doing so makes you more secure. So it's kind of up to individual people to decide whether they're willing to take on that inconvenience in order to have that layer of security. I do think that anytime that you are disclosing kind of secret information or things that you don't want any risk of being public, like companies having certain meetings, really, really take advantage of these features because you don't want, just because of a little inconvenience, for something big to get out or for some secret to come out because of that.
Yeah. And, I know Zoom also has like your unique ID that someone could just pop in. If I make a separate meeting ID for every meeting I have, and so it's unique to the people in it. You can also just give your meeting who you are, and they could pop into any meeting you're in. I would think that's not something you want to.
Do not use your personal ID. So that I would recommend for nobody to use their personal meeting ID because this is essentially a permanent virtual meeting room. The ID never changes. And if anybody gets a hold of that ID and you're continually using it, then they can access every single meeting that you do. Whereas if you schedule a new meeting every time, a random ID is generated. And if they get a hold of that, then it's only that one that they can try.
You don't want people dropping into your to every meeting they feel like.
No, you really don't.
You would, I think, probably at that point just have to make another Zoom account.
I think you can request a new meeting ID. That's kind of a hassle.
Yeah. Do you think overall, I mean, you mentioned you notified Zoom, when there was something and a weakness that you guys found, that industries in general and companies like Check Point and are working together to make sure that we're all, I mean, everyone benefits the company benefits when people are safer and feel safer, that there is some collaboration going on, especially, as technology goes at lightning speed, as always, that there is some collaboration to say, hey, we're kind of in this, watching it together.
Yeah, I think intelligence sharing is important. If you discover a new malware, a new type of attack, it's really important to share that with the rest of the community. And Checkpoint Research is a pretty active branch that they discover when they discover new things or they discover a vulnerability with a company, they'll share it, because otherwise, I mean, you're not helping out the rest of the world. You're not helping out your other kind of companies and other communities. There's not really a point to discovering it.
Yeah, and we make the hackers less effective when we work together. And certainly, I know the teachers are like, look, it's hard enough as it is. Stop making our jobs harder. And certainly businesses as well. We just kind of we're trying to get through this together. So I definitely appreciate the chat. Those are great tips for people using Zoom, and I've got to start employing some of them. I've got a few of them in there, but certainly not as many as I could. So I'll have to lock and deadbolt that door a little bit better. Yeah. All right. Maya Levine, security engineer at Checkpoint Software. Thanks so much for the chat.
Thanks for having me.